Welcome to Elevating La Cultura podcast, a space where I talk with Latinas who are passionate about what they do and willing to share their wisdom with others to change the narrative, especially for the next generation. Each season is centered around different topics, but all with a Latina perspective. This is season 2, focused on health and wellness. So vámonos, and let's get into it. Hi everyone! I hope you all are having a good week so far. I can't believe we're halfway through this season already. In this week's episode, I had the privilege to chat with Patricia Peña, a licensed marriage and family therapist with her own private practice. We've grown our relationship online after meeting in 2020 through Chicago Latinx Moms Group. I love her positive and genuine energy. Her kindness is perfect for her profession, and I can tell she is truly gifted in connecting with children. She's also the co-founder of Chicago Latinx Therapy Group, a networking group for Latinx psychotherapists, which makes her a great advocate for other people in her field. She shares a lot of great info on therapy and also encouragement to elevate the next generation of therapists. So please enjoy our conversation. Hi! I'm so excited to have you on! Oh my goodness.
I'm so excited.
I'm excited to introduce the listeners and the viewers to Paty. And we have known each other for maybe since the pandemic started. So we are in end of April 2021. And we met through Chicago Latinx Moms community probably at the beginning of 2020, like March 2020, or I think that's when I started to become really active in the Chicago Latinx Moms community. But we actually only met in person once.
That's right.
We've only, most of our relationship has only been through the internet.
Yes.
But I'm just so thankful that we've cultivated this relationship and that you are willing to come on and be a guest on the podcast. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. It's been really great building this friendship like you said. And hello everybody. My name is Patricia Peña, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I practice out of Chicago, Illinois. So just a little background, I was born and raised in Chicago, north side of the city. And I spent my summers in my parents' hometown in Mexico, in Tepatitlan, Jalisco. And so I grew up very much steeped in both cultures. And so I remember growing up figuring out or having this experience of, am I Mexican? Am I American? What am I? And I remember growing up and hearing my relatives in Mexico sometimes say some not nice things about Americans, just generalized statements about Americans being too liberal and things like that. And then I would hear negative things about Mexicans here, just through other, various folks. And so it was just confusing. But as I grew up, I kind of understood that, hey, I'm actually both. I'm not just one thing, and that's okay. Sometimes I feel a little bit more Mexican than American, and sometimes I feel a little bit more American than Mexican. So that's one of the things that I think was part of the therapist journey, this just identity, things regarding identity. And then I would say, at one point I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And in college, chemistry just completely knocked me out. And so I thought, okay, well, why do I want to be a doctor? And so I thought, okay, well, I want to help people. And so I decided to study psychology. And at the time, I did not know that studying psychology is not enough to become a therapist. So I graduated. I have a bachelor's in psychology from the University of Chicago. And then a couple years later, I went back to grad school to Northwestern University to their marriage and family therapy program. It was just really kind of happenstance. I knew that I was like a good listener and I could make a living out of that. Um, and then while I was in my master's program, one of the things that I discovered um, is that I really loved working with children. I like working all across the lifespan, but I really love working with children. And I thought to myself, hold on, I get to get paid to play with children. Like this is unreal, you know? Um, so it's been a journey. And I'm always so inspired to continue learning. And, part of the profession you get licensed. And after that, you need to get continuing education credits. So I'm always looking at different trainings and, what can I learn to kind of continue to incorporate into my toolbox to help support my clients.
Yes, I think we can all relate to that point in school where you're just like, man, either math really gets you and then like shifts your trajectory, or science gets you. And you're just like, oh, maybe I shouldn't pick like being a doctor because I can't get through this like pre-calculus.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's super relatable, like growing up Mexican American, because you're always pulled in both directions. At least I feel like I had the same experience. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, and when we were here, we like America was our culture. When we were in Mexico, Mexico was our culture, and it was always this disconnect of I'm not Mexican enough to be confident to like speak Spanish with my cousins and like keep up with them, and I'm not confident enough like to fit in to the circles that I wanted to be in here in my education uh, life. So I can totally relate to that identity, and I feel like as Mexican Americans, and if you're a child of an immigrant, like that identity crisis is something that you are struggling with from such a young age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think another layer of that too, as something that made me remember a part of the experience too, was, um, like growing up, we spoke Spanish at home and I didn't learn English until I went to school. And, growing up, we would watch, the Saturday morning cartoons, right? Like stuff of the 80s and the early 90s. So that also kind of helped me learn English. But I remember that every time I would go to Mexico, my even though we spoke Spanish at home, I always felt a little kind of uneasy there. Like, am I saying things correctly? Um, and I there's all these funny jokes in the family about things I would say, incorrectly, and we can joke about it now. And guess what? I still make mistakes in my Spanish now. I consider myself pretty fluent, um, but it's okay. It's no one has to be perfect, and also there's such a thing as Spanglish, and that's a whole life of its own, and I love that too. But yeah, there's a lot of judgment about like how much Spanish or not enough Spanish, or I think all of it's okay. And I think we're probably a lot of folks are so much more connected to it in their brains and in their bodies rather than like what can actually come out. And I think it's in our genes somehow.
Yes, because I can understand like 99% of what people are saying. But then when I try to connect my brain with like actually speaking, it always is like, am I saying it right? Like I sound really slow in thinking, and it's like I can't keep up. But man, I really do value the fact that I am bilingual, even if my Spanish, like I'm not as confident in my Spanish. I still value that and think that it's an asset, even if it is Spanglish, and even if I do mess up. Now, when I was a kid, I was like tortured if I did mess up because of the shame that came along with it. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, like you were made fun of. I was as well. And so that's why I think I shut down and didn't speak Spanish as often when I was a kid. But now I'm like, you know what? I need to get over that, and I need to just like step into it. And I feel like now that I've made that mindset shift, I'm more confident to speak and I don't hesitate as much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a great way to even kind of access that part of yourself too is to, I've done this a lot with friends where you just have a cafecito, like you meet someone for a cafe and you're like, okay, let's work on our Spanish, like let's really try and have a conversation just in Spanish. And I've helped friends who were Latinx and friends who were not Latinx that both wanted to work on their Spanish. And yeah, I think it's just engaging in it and knowing that mistakes are going to happen, but that as long as you feel safe with that person that you're meeting with, that the way in which they help you is not going to be, you know, damaging or hurtful, right?
Yes. And that is a great idea. I need to like jot that down, take notes, cuz I think that is a wonderful way to like hang out with people, but then also like just practice in a safe space. Uh yeah, that's a great idea. All right. So I want to know, you already said that you during your schooling is when you started to realize that you really liked working with children.
Hmm.
So can you elaborate a little bit more? Like, when did that click happen? Like, why was that? Um, why did you make that decision?
Yeah, I think in graduate school, when you're learning to be a therapist, uh, you learn all these sorts of basic skills. And, you have to think about, well, how would you work with a 1-year old who doesn't have speech or very much speech compared to how would you work with a 9-year old versus a 16-year old versus, an adult. And so uh, what I discovered is that you work with children through play. That play is their work. Play is the way to access their inner world, and you will see themes in children's play. So if I in my career I've worked with a lot of children who've experienced various forms of trauma, and you'll see it in, for example, there'll be a lot of good guys bad guys kind of theme, um and or there'll be like helplessness, right? Like, so there's these different themes that kind of pop up. And with patients and with continuing to meet with the client, they work through that through play. It's really fascinating. So it's not like in talk therapy with adults or even with teenagers where you just talk about whatever the issue is. Um, and there's just so much that you can do with kids, and kids are just generally really open, right? If I have art materials out, we might engage in an art activity, or let's say they're kind of coming into a session and they're just kind of, again, this is back in the days when we could meet people in person. Right now I've been doing telehealth, but if they're coming in and they've got lots of energy in their body, you know okay, well, maybe engaging them in some sort of activity that's going to allow for large movements, right? Like, so when I meet up with a client, no matter what age they are, I'm always reading so many different things, right? Like, how are they coming in? What's their posture like? What's their tone of voice? What's their affect like? Um, just how are they overall presenting? Because that says quite a bit, right? Like how they're coming in from their week. Um, if anything maybe happened like even right before coming in, and I'll usually see it on the parents face too, right? Like, how they're doing. So it just, over years you gain all this experience in kind of reading people. And yeah, so it's really just kind of like assessing what does this person need today, and how can we, fulfill that need. Well, thinking about the treatment plan and what they're coming in for and all of those things.
I have seen a shift in mental health and wellness and the value of therapy in the past handful of years. And maybe I just have realized it because I'm getting older and have actually been talking to other people and have seen the shift in how people are more open in talking about anxiety, stress, uh, depression, and they're very open in sharing about uh, seeing a therapist. And I feel like that shift in like me as an adult, I did not see that growing up. So mental health was not spoken about. It was just something that you had to get over. Like, oh, you're stressed, it'll be fine in a few days. Oh, you're depressed, I think you're just a little sad. Go take a walk or just sleep for a little bit, you'll be fine. And if it lasted longer, it's like, well, you're not trying hard enough to like overcome
Mm-hmm.
that. And so because I saw that in the adults around me, that's what I also internalized and thought for myself. And it wasn't until I already had kids that my doctor suggested, like, maybe you should talk to somebody about how you're feeling. Maybe you should see a therapist. And I even mentioned it to some family, and they're just like, oh, are you sure about that? It's going to be like on your record, or like your insurance is going to have to pay for it. Like it's going to be on your, like, and I was like, well, I think this is the best option for me. And I had to be my own advocate at that point. But in doing the work, I've been able to model to my children and like speak openly about it and say, like, sometimes you're just overwhelmed with like a lot of feelings, and it really helps to talk with somebody. And I'm just like I had this conversation with my daughter recently, and I'm just like I help you kind of think through your thoughts when you're feeling, like you said, big emotion. A therapist can be that for you as well. It could be that for me. It could be that for your father. And I am just like working hard to normalize that for other people in my circle, number one, but also my children. And I feel like it's so important to be talking about this and normalizing it for the next generation. So, how have you seen a shift like this in your work and like who you're working with, especially since you're focused on kids?
Yeah. I definitely think that there has been a shift. You know, I was in my master's program from 2008 to 2010. So I've been in the field, roughly 10, 12 years. And I think there's just more information out there in general, right? I think social media um, has helped kind of normalize mental health. Um, I also think that, like churches, for example, or other religious institutions are kind of differentiating what they can support someone with versus, you know, it's okay to go to a therapist too. Like you can do both. um, and um, so I don't quite know how to pinpoint what it is in like the culture shift, but there definitely is a shift, and it does improve over time. And what I have said to people is give it a shot. Um, and I do say a few things. For example, just know that the first person that you meet, maybe you click with them, maybe you don't. Like I've gone to medical doctors that I've fired that I did not like their bedside manner, right? So I am not, if I'm getting a service, I need to have a connection with my provider, right? And so I encourage people, if you meet with a therapist, I say like give it 1, 2, 3 times. And if you're just not feeling it, um, okay, go meet with someone else, but don't give up because sometimes it is just a matter of finding the right fit. Um, I will say one thing that I have been noticing in terms of the our community has been as more and more people are open to participating in therapy and or trying it out. Um, they really want a Latinx therapist. And I think that's really exciting. I mean, this is one of the reasons I became a therapist is because I wanted to be able to work with my community. Um, and this is also one of the reasons that I have so many colleagues, in the therapist community that are Latinx, and um, my colleague and I, her name is Priscila de Jovio, and she's also a therapist. We created the Chicago Latinx Therapy Group on Facebook. It's a networking group just for Latinx therapists. And it has been just such a wonderful community because I think we're up to at least 270 therapists in the Chicagoland area. And it's great because if someone is full, but people still get referrals all the time. And so we're able to say, hey, in search of a therapist that accepts this insurance, this type of issue, et cetera, et cetera. They'll post a little bit of detail and then hopefully someone has space and they'll say, hey, send them my way and they'll post their information. And the whole point was like, let's get people access to services. And I know, for example, too, in Chicago Latina Moms, there's so much work to do there because, you know, we want to explain how to get services. I think people don't know how to get services. I mean, that's a whole conversation in and of itself, too. And there are services out there for folks that don't have insurance. There are. It's just a matter of finding it. Sometimes it's pretty inconvenient in terms of travel, like when things will no longer be in telehealth. You could have to travel far, but you can get services. Um, or, I think telehealth in some ways is here to stay too.
Yeah,
Um,
I think so too.
yeah. Oh man, that was a whole shock in and of itself when that happened. Most therapists didn't do telehealth services. And so, I mean, think about it. I had to like learn how do I engage a little person on the screen for therapy when we're not in the same space. We can't like move around. We're like, like in front of a screen and they're also doing the screen all day for school. And oh man, it was such a tough learning curve. Such a tough learning curve. But I feel like I went on 10 tangents.
No, well, I am going to pull from those tangents.
Please do.
I love the representation of having a Latinx therapy networking group because I feel like having a therapist, if you are Latinx, is going to, or having a therapist that is also Latinx, if you are Latinx, is going to make a huge difference in your journey with therapy. When I had a therapist, she was not Latinx, and I definitely felt like I still had a wall, like I still had to present as someone who had assimilated into the culture, and like I felt like I still had to prove myself. And yeah, I know I had like I still have my own journey with or I had not yet gone through my journey that brought me to this space. But I do remember feeling like, if this is my therapist, like, why should I have to hide parts of myself just to make her feel comfortable? And it wasn't her fault. It wasn't like it was the beginning of my journey in realizing this about myself. So that's why I think it's so important to have in this space of growth, and like when you're trying to like break down all of these um, thoughts in your head, like it's so important to be able to relate to the person that is helping you through that. And so that's why I think it's so important for representation in the Latinx community, or in any community, community. Like you need to be able to relate to your therapist. But what can you tell me that you have seen come out of this network that you have created?
Well, in this group, like I said, we share our referrals with each other. We let each other know about training opportunities. I actually just did a training. I want to say it was last weekend, and a group of therapists. They're all wonderful. Um, it's a group of, I think, about 5 of us. We did the phase 1 brain spotting training, and I mean, we were all just fascinated. And so it was on Zoom, but we're like, texting each other, and we were so excited. We're like, oh man, like we have to practice with each other. Like stuff is so cool. And, science is so amazing. And so we share those training opportunities with each other. And, you know, there's a couple other ideas that have been kind of thrown around, but it's just a matter of logistics, like a consultation group. Um, so we could talk about our clinical cases together and support each other. We've talked about also doing in-person trainings where we could get continuing education credits. Um, Definitely COVID have put a wrench in those plans, but we certainly hope that in the future we can have in-person meetups, um, and even just for friendship too, friendship and community. Sometimes when you're a therapist, it can be hard to make friends because sometimes people think that because you're a therapist, they can just kind of come and just kind of unload, and that's not okay, right? I think there's a difference, right? Like if you're having a tough time and you're chatting with your girlfriend, that's fine, But I think to expect your friend who is a therapist to act like a therapist for you, that's not okay. So sometimes therapists have a hard time having friends out, that are not therapists. And so sometimes it's really fun to just hang out with other therapists, and just kind of be yourself. And so, yeah, so definitely looking to just more in-person meetups. A couple of us were talking about like, let's do brunch soon now that, more outdoor cafes are kind of up and running. And so really looking forward to that. Um, Oh, and I should also say that the group is also open to students that are currently in master's programs. So you don't have to be licensed as a therapist, but if you are in a mental health program, so if you're studying social work and you have the goal of becoming a licensed clinical social worker, you can join the group. If you are studying counseling and you are planning on becoming a licensed clinical counselor, you can join the group. If you are working towards getting your PsyD, which is the equivalent of a psychologist, you can join the group. So as long as you could be a student and join. And so I think there's that aspect of mentorship too. We post job postings all the time. Um, like somebody the other day posted, I'm about to graduate and I'm about to start job interviews. Any tips? And so I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, what's a good tip? And I said to them, you know what? Think of a few of your clinical cases that you've had that you feel really great about, and you're really strong conceptualization that you could just talk about, and that's going to show your strengths. And so I thought that was the best piece of advice that I could give in a job interview. And um, or sometimes somebody posts something about, hey, looking for a book on this topic, or I need psychoeducation for parents on this topic. Who knows of a resource? And so it's just a great little community.
That is so encouraging. I feel like we need more communities in these specialized um, like vocations to encourage people that they're not alone. Like if you are a therapist, like a soon to be therapist, like there's this community that will help elevate you to where you need to be. So that's great. I wanted to ask, do you do your um, sessions in Spanish or in English or in both?
All of it. English, Spanish, Spanglish. Sometimes with kids, we'll do funny accents, on purpose, you know. We'll pretend we're British or something, and then we put on an accent. And yeah, no, I do it all. And sometimes if I have a client that speaks only Spanish or Spanish is their strongest language, I will absolutely do the session in Spanish. But even folks that have been in this country for a long time and maybe they didn't quite have the opportunity of learning English, they still know quite a bit. And so sometimes I'll say, I'm having a hard time thinking in my brain how to say this, so I'm going to say it in English and let's just get through it together. And I do it, and then it ends up being fine. Like they understand me. And so yeah, it's I like that I can do that, and I think I really resonated, Karina, when you were talking about when you were in your own therapy and expressing yourself. Um, the times that I've been to therapy, all of my therapists have been white females, Caucasian females, and I feel like I could talk about my culture, but I couldn't. I couldn't necessarily just go into Spanglish, or I couldn't, because there's certain things you just need to express in Spanish that don't
Mm-hmm.
quite translate, and so I did feel that part was like missing a little bit, but otherwise I've had really, really positive experiences, generally speaking, in the times that I've been in therapy. And I have thought about like, oh, what if my next therapist is Latinx too, in the future. So it's in the back of my brain too. But now, because I also started this networking group, it's like, okay, how do I find someone that's not in the network? So it's completely, but everyone's professional anyway. It would be confidential. So actually, it wouldn't really matter.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. So, when we were talking, or when you were talking a few minutes ago, you said that some people don't even know how to start the process of finding a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And like just that process is overwhelming enough for someone to say, like, no, I'm just not going to do it. So, why don't you walk us through the process of finding a therapist or even just someone starting their mental health journey?
So when someone is interested in getting therapy services, they can always start off by going to their primary care doctor and asking for a referral. Sometimes the type of insurance that you have is going to kind of dictate where you can go and get your services. But they would know what insurance you have, and they could kind of send you in the right direction. Or sometimes, depending on where you go to the doctor, they might have a social worker on site, and you could ask to speak with a social worker, and then you can get referrals that way. You could also do an internet search. Sometimes there's lots of different search engines that you can look up to find a therapist. So for example, there's Psychology Today, which I'm listed in Psychology Today. So if you go to psychologytoday.com and you look up Patricia Peña, you'll find my bio and how to contact me. I'm also listed on a therapy site called therapyden.com. But there's really like a ton of them. And there's one specifically for Latinx therapists, and I think that's it's a national directory. So if you were to find someone like local to Chicago, for example, you're not going to get that big of uh, a sample, because we just need to encourage more Latinx therapists to kind of get on that directory, for example. all of these things cost money. So these are just business decisions that therapists have to make. But um, there's even one I think called blacktherapist.com, which is amazing, right? Um, so there's just tons of search engines. Or you could also, for folks that don't have insurance, you could Google uh, mental health services sliding scale, for example, and a few things will pop up. So there are a few organizations out there that do provide sliding scale services, and so what that means is they will ask you some questions about your income, and they will determine the fee, and you just pay that fee per appointment. And so, for example, when I was a student at Northwestern, I was doing my practicum through the Family Institute. And so the Family Institute has a bunch of student therapists, and they are the ones that can provide those sliding scale services. Um, and those students has a ton of supervision, so they are very well qualified to meet with folks. Um, yeah, there's a ton of organizations out there, and also here's like a trick. People don't know they can do this, but even if you were to find a therapist, let's say on Psychology Today or whatever these websites are, you can contact the therapist of your choice and say, I don't have insurance. This is my budget. You know, do you have sliding scale slots on your caseload? Right? Like, can you take me on, basically? And they'll let you know. I know I started my private practice last year, Patricia Peña Therapy, and I it took a while to get paneled with insurance, and so it was out of pocket. Clients who could pay out of pocket, and I also listed myself on it's called openpathcollective.com. And Open Path, if you're a therapist on there, you are committing to providing therapy services at a maximum of $60 a session. You cannot charge more than $60 for one session. If it's individual therapy, and maximum $80 for couples therapy. But it's a range, right? So it's like 0 to 60 for individuals, 0 to 80 um, for couples or family work. And so, I mean, I'm listed on there. I'm I'm full, so for that particular website, I've indicated, not accepting clients at this time because I am full. I just don't have any space. But yeah, so there's a couple different ways. Sometimes asking a friend too. Do you know of someone? Um, I do have a colleague that is working. I have two different colleagues that are working on two new directories. Um, and maybe, whenever this podcast airs, we can include in the comments more information about those, but that are kind of local to Chicago. But yeah, there's just always kind of directories popping up, and people just kind of can do their Google search.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those resources. I feel like it can be so overwhelming, especially if you don't have insurance, or you know that you need therapy, but you know that your budget every month is so limited. So it's really good to know that there's resources and therapists out there that can work with your income level or your budget.
I think the point is, don't feel afraid to ask. You have to be your advocate, right? And if you don't ask, you're just not going to know. Some people can even do it pro bono. It's just a matter of asking. Like there are some practices where their model is really important. Like they want people to have access, and so they will make space on their caseloads for that.
Yeah, that's so encouraging. And I feel like just knowing this, it helps people view therapy in a less scary way. Like if they feel like it's more approachable, like, oh, I can just look something up online, or I can find someone who can work with me where I'm at financially. I feel like that is like key and a big part of finding or like starting your mental health journey. I feel like the first part is getting that courage to admit that maybe you could use some help. Um, but I feel like people, like you said, like are more because of social media, they're more willing to listen and to realize that they're not alone. Um, so
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So as a Latina, what were there any like ideas or limiting beliefs that you've had to work through in your profession?
I will say, I think some things that I've kind of experienced as a Latina therapist in this particular profession has been, for example, because I am bilingual, um, sometimes I'll be asked to translate documents, and I can do that. Um, Sometimes I've had thoughts about that though, like there's also professional translators, you can pay for that. That's a whole other separate job. Um, I don't get paid extra to do those things, right? So sometimes there's a little bit of, you know, your skills get utilized in ways you weren't necessarily expecting. Um, but also, when you work in non for profits, which I have my whole career, I also work full time. Sometimes it's also kind of being about, being a team player and listen, resources are limited and, you do what you got to do to help support your little community that you're a part of. I'm trying to think. I do think that therapists in general, like when they're in school learning how to be a therapist, they don't get taught anything about owning a business. That has been a huge learning curve for me in the past year. And shout out to my therapist colleague and friend, Rocio Reyes, LCSW. She's amazing. She took me by the hand and really like walked me through step by step. This is what you need to do. And she was so patient with me and so supportive. And um, so I think, yeah, just learning all the business stuff has been challenging. But I think I would say too, like, how do you set your fee? Right. I think I think that there's a lot of maybe even guilt and shame over how do you quantify, your work, and what's like the going rate? What do folks charge? And then you know therapists spend a lot of time and money also with their continuing education, and I think I had to grapple with, well, hold on a second. I'm Latina. I speak Spanish. I am always updating my training all the time. And I think folks also don't know that when you have a client, it's not just that hour that you're meeting with them. Like I hold my clients in my mind, in my heart, in my body the rest of the week. So sometimes I'll see something or I'll read something or I'll see something on TV and it'll spark something. And I'll think, oh, I'll have to bring that to session next time. Right. So there's my headspace gets utilized more than just that hour. So I think I personally had to kind of work through how to set my fee, and my fee is not cheap, but I'm really confident in what I do, and I think I'm worth it. So I think there are these issues of um, finding value in what you can provide, um, and also I I understand that not everyone can afford that. And again, that's why I do take into consideration how many folks I can take on in my caseload that so I can have a little bit more representation, right? And at the same time, I also do community mental health work full time. So, it's I do both. I There is a balance for me. So I'm trying to think what else as a Latina professional. Um, I think one thing I will say is that I have been in professional spaces where sometimes people assume things about, like, if someone is bringing up a case about a Latino client and and they're not Latinx themselves and they're making an assumption about the culture, I have to correct people because I'm like, please don't assume. Never ever ever assume. I remember this even happening to me on social media where I posted some sort of like progressive parenting sort of thing, and a therapist friend commented and said something like, "Oh yeah, get Latino parents to buy into that," or something like that. And I'm like, I'm a Latino parent. Like, I, you know, there's a lot of progressive Latino parents out there. Like, don't make assumptions. That's not okay. And I had to call that out because you have to lead with curiosity and just not assume. Um, so I think I have encountered that in professional spaces. Generally speaking, I am super duper protective of my community, the population I work with. I'm very protective of BIPOC therapists in general, in their experience and them feeling supported. Like there's folks that I supervise, and it is so important for me to provide a space where they can just be themselves, all their layers, right? Because I do, oh, you know what? This is bringing up another idea that, sometimes when we enter professional spaces, oftentimes they're mostly white spaces. Let's call it what it is, right? And so there's lots of ideas about what it means to be professional. And those standards are often coming from white Eurocentric perspectives. And so sometimes I think like, okay, well, what does it mean to be a Latina professional? And I have a sassy side, you know, and that's a Paty thing, and that's also a, a Latina thing. And I don't want to have to hide that, that's I'm a package deal. That's what you get. And so I think with I'm just very, very protective of other BIPOC therapists. And I want people to be able to show up authentically and not feel like they have to hide parts of themselves because in order to kind of exist in a certain workspace. The reality is it doesn't work that way. And most folks do end up having to kind of hide certain parts of themselves. But that is something that I do think about quite a bit.
Yes, I love that you brought that up. Like that a lot of these concepts or ways of thinking about, like you said, professionalism, or like even in dress, even in like how do you show up as a professional, have been rooted in the white culture. And when we do show up and we feel like we are professional, but then it's like, oh, that's too bright, or there's too many colors, or that's too loud, that doesn't elevate our culture. It doesn't acknowledge like who we are as like who we are in our own culture and what that does to us.
Absolutely. And it makes me think, for example, of like Afro Latinas, right? In workspaces and having to worry about hair, like that is just, that gets me really going. That gets me really angry when I think about it because, the whole diaspora is beautiful. And, however folks show up, that's great, but the fact that there's, schools and workplaces have these expectations that are just completely inappropriate, really. There's a lot of institutions that need to do quite a lot of updating. Um, so
Yeah, um, I think that we are starting to change the narrative. I think, like what you said, how um, there's Latinx parents that are progressive in their way of thinking. Like I have worked really hard to shift what parenting looks like as Latina, and especially parenting biracial,
mhm.
bicultural kids,
Yep.
and how I want to change the that narrative and that way of thinking for my kids. We I know that like chancla culture has been brought up in speaking about changing the way that we
Hmm.
as Latinas think about
Hmm.
parenting. And I have had to wrestle with a lot of that mindset as well but I feel like I have also, because it's become more um, talked about and shared on social media, like it's making me think through things that happened in my childhood and how I want to change that for my children. Or like if I've already started changing them, it gives me the words to be able to explain it or like stand by it when I'm talking to other people.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's really important, and it's really great that you are like calling it out when you see it and saying like, no, we gotta start talking about this differently. You have to stop making assumptions. I think that's going to be really
Hmm.
crucial for the next generation of Latinx therapists, or even like people of color in general, like when it comes to therapy. So thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so I do want to ask you, like, what encouragement, piece of advice do you have for the next generation of therapists?
Ooh. Okay. Couple things. So I would say find a mentor, um, someone that could you can meet with a couple times a year if you're able, or even if it's like twice a year, but just someone that you're kind of checking in with as you progress in the profession. Sometimes people know that they want to be a therapist, for example, but they don't quite know like what their niche is, right? Like what population do they want to focus on, or what clinical areas do they really want to focus on? Um, and so sometimes having that mentor, they can help you kind of figure out those things. Um, and I would also say be really strategic about your continuing education credits, because you work towards getting licensed first. Okay, that's done. But you have to renew every 2 years, you have to renew your license. And so you have to kind of prove that you've attended all these trainings and here's all your continuing education credits. And what ends up happening is that people will sign up for different continuing education credit courses, and it'll be like a day long thing, and you kind of sit through it and you realize, what did I learn from this training? Oftentimes not much, because if you think about it, you can't just sit through something and expect it to seep through your pores. You have to read on it, you have to do a book club with people, you have to get clinical consultation. um, so just kind of knowing this idea of your continuing education has to come through multiple formats. um, Continue to get supervision and consultation even if you're licensed. I would say that's very important. um, which I love doing that too, by the way. That's like a whole other kind of specialty. I love consulting. um, yeah, I would say as the therapist would kind of know what area of specialty they want to focus on, do research on what are the treatment modalities that you can, kind of dive deep into, right? So for example, one of the areas of clinical expertise that I have is in treating trauma, and I feel confident in treating trauma no matter what the age group is. So I've learned a bunch of different treatment modalities, things like sensorimotor psychotherapy, which it's a body-based somatic therapy that focuses on helping the client process things in their body versus talk therapy. It's not that you don't talk in this type of treatment, but it's very focused on your what's happening inside. I just studied Brainspotting phase 1, and I'm super pumped about that. I want to go through like all the phases of training. So it's just figuring out what you're really interested in and what are the treatment modalities, because there's so many types of therapy out there. And also do not get seduced by all of the training opportunities, because that's what happens to me. I get seduced all the time. I'm like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And then I end up doing like 10 trainings in a year, and I'm like, I'm overwhelmed. Why did I do this to myself? So just like pacing, and it's okay. Like, you have the rest of your life to get there, So it's just like anything else. Like when you see a beauty product like out in social media, and like they're totally targeting me, right? Like I'm going to end up buying that product because they keep popping up on my feed. It's the same thing with trainings. Like, okay, I'm seeing this thing a lot. What is this thing? Let me go find out about it. And then all of a sudden now they've got my curiosity. I'm like, okay, now I have to go train in this because I can't not get out of my head, So just pacing yourself, I would say.
I do the same with business workshops. I want to do them all.
Yes.
And then I'm like, I don't know what to do first.
Yes.
Oh my
Absolutely.
goodness. Man, okay. Thank you so much. This conversation is filled with so much knowledge and wisdom, and I'm just so thankful for your time and for your willingness to share all this with us. Where can people best find you?
Well, I can be found on psychologytoday.com for now. I do have a website in the works. I have not been the best communicator, so that is pending. So hopefully, maybe in the future, once your podcast is up and running, eventually I'll be able to come and say, hey, you can find me here at this website. But you can email me through that Psychology Today website, and I would be able to respond.
Perfect. I'll include that in the show notes, and then also on the ending slide. So I'll include the website and then your email.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. We are recording on a Sunday, and I am at peace. I am filled up. I am ready for the week. I'm inspired, and I'm just so excited for the next generation of therapists to also be inspired and to feel like they're needed, and that there's a community that's willing to walk alongside them. So
thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. All right, I will connect with you on like Chicago Latina Moms. But I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Isn't she just someone you want to hang out with? Not only did she share about the value of therapy, but she shared with us great ways to find a therapist so it doesn't have to be an overwhelming process. She's such a strong advocate for her peers and anyone else in her field, and I'm encouraged to see other Latinx graduates see the value of pursuing a career in therapy and then helping those in their communities. Okay, amigos, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share, rate on Apple Podcasts, take a screenshot to post on Instagram at Elevating La Cultura, or send me a DM. You can also comment on our YouTube video if you're watching online. I always like to hear from people and how they resonate with the stories that I share. So, enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, y nos vemos next week. Bye!